Mistress tricked Millionaire into signing away. His fortune-pregnant wife was the true heir. Have you ever witnessed a betrayal so cunning it left you reeling from shock? Welcome to a tale of unimaginable deception and heartbreak, where a charismatic millionaire fell under the spell of a crafty mistress, only to lose everything he ever owned. But if you think that's dramatic enough, wait until you learn of the pregnant wife whose quiet endurance set the stage for an explosive revelation. This true-to-life drama will take you on a twisting journey through hidden agendas, broken trust, and unexpected alliances, all converging in one chilling moment that changed everything. Get ready. You're about to uncover a story you won't soon forget. Jackson Harrington was the kind of man whose very presence seemed to make the air crackle with electricity. At 45 years old, he had spent the majority of his adult life relentlessly climbing the corporate ladder, amassing a fortune in real estate and technology investments. His estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, sprawled over countless acres, complete with a grand mansion that boasted marble floors, gilded banisters, and a driveway large enough to park a fleet of luxury cars. If wealth was a language, Jackson was its most eloquent speaker. But behind the gleaming facade of success lay a man riddled with insecurities. Jackson had grown up in a modest household, in the rural outskirts of Ithaca, New York, where money had been tight and dreams ran wild. His father, Benjamin Harrington, never made more than a schoolteacher's salary, while his mother, Maria Harrington, supplemented the family income by selling homemade jams at local fairs. The memory of penny-pinching days haunted Jackson, pushing him toward a ceaseless quest for opulence. In the early days of his career, he met the woman who would become his wife, Elisa Carter. Elisa was different from the high society women that Jackson encountered in corporate circles. She was gentle, kind, and had a warm heart that made him feel safe in a cutthroat world. Over time, Jackson's fortune soared, and he built a name for himself as a savvy entrepreneur with an almost magical ability to spot a profitable venture. Meanwhile, Elisa stood by him in silent support, seldom stepping into the spotlight herself. By the time they reached their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson Harrington's fame, fortune, and social status had exploded. He was the man everyone wanted to know, the man whose name regularly appeared in Forbes, the man rumored to sign multi-million-dollar deals over a single dinner. His philanthropic pursuits were equally grand: donations to children's hospitals, scholarships in his name, and elegant charity galas at his estate. Indeed, from the outside, Jackson Harrington seemed to live a dream that knew no limits. But illusions have a habit of shattering under the slightest pressure. Unbeknownst to the public, and perhaps to Jackson himself, a slow corruption was eating away at the carefully constructed veneer of a perfect life. In the darkness, hidden from society's prying eyes, an elaborate betrayal was about to unfold. Mere months before disaster struck, Jackson attended a lavish charity event at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. Hosted by one of his close associates, the gala drew the crème de la crème of New York's elite. The venue sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and champagne flowed freely as live jazz music draped the night in a sensual haze. Jackson arrived with Elisa on his arm, her delicate frame draped in an elegant emerald gown that accentuated her glowing skin. She was newly pregnant, but had yet to announce it publicly, preferring to keep this joyful secret within close family for a while longer. As Jackson circulated the room, exchanging pleasantries and forging new business connections, he caught sight of a figure glimmering in the corner of his vision: Celeste Duval. At first glance, she looked like the epitome of refined elegance, a slender woman with high cheekbones, raven black hair styled in a sleek updo, and eyes that seemed as though they could see straight into one's soul. She wore a form-fitting navy dress, cut just low enough to spark curiosity without crossing into scandal. Celeste seemed to float across the room, weaving in and out of conversations with an effortless grace. If Elisa exuded warmth, Celeste radiated a dangerous allure. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jackson found himself entranced. She smiled, raising her champagne flute in a silent toast from across the room. The crowd faded. Even the rising wave of conversation and music dulled in Jackson's mind. Something in Celeste's gaze promised excitement, an unspoken invitation to a realm he had always kept at bay. Caught off guard by his own reaction, Jackson momentarily forgot the ring on his finger, the wife at his side, and the child forming in Elisa's womb. When the enchantment broke, Jackson quickly turned back to Elisa, who was engrossed in conversation with a family friend. Guilt pricked his conscience, but the memory of Celeste's enchanting eyes lingered. By the time he decided to politely excuse himself to meet new patrons, Celeste was standing just a few feet away, her perfume wafting in the air. "Mr. Harrington, I believe." She spoke with a slight accent he couldn't place, French, perhaps, or something more exotic. "I'm Celeste Duval. I've heard so many fascinating things about you." Jackson forced a polite smile, controlling the sudden flutter in his chest. "A pleasure, Miss Duval. I hope none of the stories are too outlandish." Her lips curved in a mysterious smile. "Quite the opposite. You're even more impressive in person." Within minutes, they discovered mutual acquaintances, laughed over jokes only the upper echelon found humorous, and bonded over a shared interest in high-stakes investments. In Celeste, Jackson saw a spark he hadn't felt in years, something that made him feel alive, desired and powerful. By the time the night ended, an unspoken agreement had formed between them. They would meet again, with or without a crowd. Celeste Duval was, in truth, no stranger to opulent affairs or the wealthy men who frequented them. Rumor had it she had grown up in the south of France, the daughter of a small-time art dealer who made his fortune by questionable means. In her early 20s, she had moved to New York to carve out her own destiny, using her wit, charm, and cunning to navigate the corridors of high society. While no one could pinpoint exactly how Celeste earned her lavish lifestyle, she never seemed to lack the means to attend exclusive galas, dine at Michelin-starred restaurants, or vacation in the world's most expensive resorts. She had crossed paths with many powerful men, some married, some single, all wealthy and enamored by her mesmerizing beauty. Yet Celeste always walked away, citing their deficiencies: too controlling, too predictable, too boring. When she first laid eyes on Jackson Harrington, she recognized an irresistible combination of traits: a man with unyielding ambition, deep pockets, and, crucially, a certain vulnerability beneath the confidence. From that moment she knew Jackson was to be her masterpiece. A week after the Plaza Gala, Celeste orchestrated a coincidental meeting at a private art showing in Soho. She had a contact slip Jackson an invitation, feigning that the entire arrangement was purely business-related. Jackson arrived alone, hoping that a solitary outing would give him space to think about the expansion of his real estate projects. Yet, almost the instant he walked into the gallery, he spotted Celeste, her posture regal, her black dress hugging every curve, and her eyes locking onto him as though she'd been expecting him for an eternity. They conversed about art, sipped on a selection of rare wines, and gradually retreated to a quieter corner. Celeste hung onto his every word, her laugh bright and encouraging, stroking Jackson's ego in a way that felt intoxicating. When he left that evening, he couldn't stop replaying their conversation in his mind. The notion that he might be at risk of an affair began as a whisper of temptation, quickly ballooning into an overpowering lure. Over the next few weeks, a dance of seduction unfolded. Celeste would text Jackson at odd hours, sometimes under the guise of seeking investment advice, other times to share a witty remark or an inviting photograph. Jackson responded, each time a little more enticed. The guilt gnawed at him, especially whenever he saw Elisa, who was beginning to show the subtle signs of her pregnancy, a delicate rounding of her belly, a particular glow in her cheeks. And yet, Celeste's pull was magnetic, offering an escape from the responsibilities that weighed on him. Love, lust, or simple infatuation? Jackson didn't know. But with each message, each stolen meeting, he ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory, unknowingly planting the seeds of his own downfall. Elisa Harrington had always been the quiet force in Jackson's life, providing stability and comfort in the face of his relentless ambitions. She never demanded the spotlight, preferring instead to nurture the warm home environment that Jackson could return to when the business world grew too cold. However, in the months following that fateful gala, she began to sense a shift in her husband's behavior. Subtle though it was, Elisa noticed it in the way Jackson's eyes seemed distant during dinner, how he abruptly ended calls when she entered the room, and how he seemed to conjure endless late-night meetings that kept him away from home. A gnawing suspicion crept into Elisa's mind. Was this the result of looming business pressures, or was there something else, someone else pulling him away? Normally a peaceful soul, the changes haunted her. She found herself lying awake at night, one hand on her growing belly, wondering where Jackson might be. Still, her innate optimism led her to rationalize his behavior. Jackson had enormous deals in the pipeline, after all, and the stress of it all might be taking a toll. Determined not to jump to conclusions, she decided to communicate her concerns openly. One evening, she prepared his favorite meal, roasted lamb with rosemary sauce, and welcomed him at the door with a warm smile. She noticed his slightly startled expression, as though he'd forgotten the kind of comfort waiting for him at home. "How was your day?" Elisa asked, gently, trying to catch his gaze. Jackson didn't remove his coat immediately, an odd habit he'd picked up recently. Long, hectic. "There's a lot going on with the new property deal in Miami." They sat down to dinner, and Elisa calmly suggested they talk through what might be bothering him. For a moment, she believed she'd reached him. Jackson's expression softened, and his shoulders relaxed, as though he might confide. But then the phone on the table buzzed with a text message. He glanced down, tension spiking across his face again. "It's just some urgent business," he muttered. "I'm sorry, Elisa. I'll be right back." He stepped out of the room to answer it, leaving Elisa to quietly poke at her food, alone. Unbeknownst to her, the name Celeste Duval lit up his screen, an insidious presence carving a wedge into the marriage that had once been a bedrock of trust. As Jackson spent more time with Celeste, he began spinning a labyrinth of falsehoods to keep Elisa and the rest of his social circle in the dark. Business trips extended from 3 days to a week. Late-night emails and phone calls conveniently aligned with Celeste's invitations to exclusive after-parties, private yacht events, and weekend getaways in the Hamptons. For the first time in his life, Jackson found it difficult to maintain composure. He was juggling two worlds that threatened to collide at any moment. Elisa, meanwhile, did her best to remain supportive. She was nearly 4 months pregnant by now, navigating the ups and downs of early motherhood while her husband slipped further away. It was only in the quiet moments, after Jackson had retreated into his study or left the house on one of his spurious meetings, that she allowed herself to cry, the tears fueled by hormonal surges and heartbreak alike. Jackson's personal assistant, Martina Polanski, began to notice small irregularities. Martina had worked for Jackson for almost a decade and prided herself on being discreet. But she wasn't blind to the shifts in his schedule, the strange credit card charges at boutique hotels, and the hushed phone calls. She decided to stay silent, telling herself it was not her place to question her boss's private life, yet a subtle worry gnawed at her. Jackson Harrington was powerful, but he was no match for scandal if this affair ever went public. Still, Celeste played her role flawlessly, the enchanting siren, the confidant who bolstered Jackson's ego. She'd stroke his hair while he vented about corporate pressures, console him when deals fell through, and celebrate extravagantly when victories rolled in. Every step of the way, Celeste studied Jackson, his vulnerabilities, his wants, his insecurities. She painted a portrait of a man hungry for affection and burdened by the weight of impending fatherhood. Little by little, she gathered her brushstrokes, preparing to craft her grand masterpiece, the total takeover of Jackson's life. Late June arrived with a humid, golden haze that clung to the Manhattan skyline. As the sun dipped behind skyscrapers, Jackson Harrington found himself gripping the steering wheel of his Aston Martin harder than usual. He had received an invitation he felt powerless to refuse, a late-night rendezvous at Celeste, Duval's newly rented penthouse suite perched in one of Midtown's most exclusive high-rises. The message had come in just that morning, tinged with excitement and a promise of secrecy. Now, as he navigated the bustling city streets, a silent war waged inside him. Guilt and anticipation battled for dominance, each thought colliding with Elisa's image, his pregnant wife resting at home. By the time Jackson arrived, the sky was dark, punctuated only by gleaming city lights. He handed his keys to the valet, then stepped into the private elevator that soared to the penthouse. He couldn't stop his pulse from quickening. Part of him knew he shouldn't be there, that every step away from Elisa was a betrayal. Yet another part, recently awakened by Celeste's presence, throbbed with curiosity and craving. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the entrance to a magnificent suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the living room, capturing a panorama of Central Park's treetops and the jewel-like glow of Manhattan at night. Plush ivory couches were arranged around a low marble table, where a vase of gardenias lent a subtle, intoxicating fragrance to the air. The lighting was soft and warm, casting shadows that hinted at hidden corners and untold secrets. Modern art dotted the walls, each piece as sleek and enigmatic as its owner. Celeste appeared in the hallway wearing a crimson silk robe that shimmered under the ambient lighting. Her raven hair spilled down her back in loose waves, and her bare feet made no sound on the polished floor. The sight of her wrenched Jackson out of his internal turmoil. She flashed him a slow, knowing smile, a gesture that conveyed both welcome and victory. Without a word, she stepped forward and pressed a lingering kiss to his lips, one that left him reeling from the force of his own desire. "Welcome," she purred, taking his hand and guiding him inside. "I've been waiting for you." Jackson swallowed hard. His gaze flickered to the opulence around them. "This place is stunning," he managed, fighting to maintain composure. Celeste's smile widened. "I wanted to create something unforgettable for tonight." With that, she led him through the spacious penthouse until they arrived at a glass-topped dining table. A private chef stood nearby, putting the finishing touches on an exquisite meal: seared scallops, roasted asparagus, and a dessert of delicate, rose-scented macarons. 2 candles flickered in the center of the table, their soft flames dancing each time the air conditioning whispered through the room. Over dinner, Celeste skillfully kept the conversation flowing. She asked about Jackson's latest real estate deals, leaned forward with a curiosity that seemed genuine, and laughed at his wry anecdotes about corporate board meetings. The candor in her emerald eyes, the occasional brush of her fingers on his hand, it all cast a spell. Jackson felt his usual polished exterior peel away, replaced by something raw, more impulsive. It was as though he had stepped into an alternate life for the evening, far from the responsibilities of fatherhood looming on the horizon. After the plates were cleared, Celeste beckoned Jackson toward the terrace. Shielded by tinted glass panels, it offered an unobstructed view of the city lights. The night air was warm but refreshing, and from this vantage point, the rush and roar of traffic below seemed like a distant hum. She draped a light shawl around her shoulders and gestured for Jackson to join her on a plush outdoor sofa. A gentle breeze rustled her hair, and the stars, faint though they were over Manhattan, twinkled overhead. They sipped vintage wine from tall, slender glasses. Celeste regaled Jackson with stories of her childhood, an enchanted vision of growing up in Provence among rolling lavender fields and hidden beach coves along the Mediterranean. She spoke of traveling to exotic locales, each tale laced with adventure and glimmers of risk. The more she talked, the more Jackson felt himself drawn in, seduced not just by her beauty, but by the promise of a life unbound by the careful rules he had always followed. Eventually, Celeste shifted closer, her voice dropping to a velvety whisper. "Jack," she began, running a finger along the rim of her wineglass, "there's something important I've been considering. Something for our future." Her closeness, the way her hair grazed his shoulder, sent a ripple of heat through him. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I know how massive your financial empire is, your real estate holdings, your stocks, your partnership deals." She paused, her eyes searching his. "But I also know how taxing it can be. Different accounts scattered everywhere, so many properties to manage. It must be exhausting, especially now that your personal life is changing." Jackson tensed slightly, reminded of Elisa's pregnancy. He wondered if Celeste was about to push him toward a conversation about leaving his wife, or about how they might navigate their relationship once a child was in the picture. But Celeste took a more cunning route. "I have connections in Switzerland," she continued smoothly. "Very discreet, highly reputable bankers who specialize in creating secure trusts. I've been thinking about how we could simplify your finances. It would allow you to breathe easier, Jack, and it would give us a layer of protection for whatever lies ahead." His heart thudded. "A trust," he repeated, trying to gather his racing thoughts. "You mean putting some of my assets out of reach from everyone else?" Celeste's lips curved into a soft smile. She placed her hand on his chest, just over his rapidly beating heart. "Not everyone. You and I would manage it. Think about it as a fortress to keep your assets safe from prying eyes. If you trust me, I can set it all up. We'll need some signatures, sure, but the result could be absolute peace of mind. Money that no competitor, no scandal could ever touch." Her voice was like silk wrapping around his doubts, smoothing them out until they barely existed. Jackson's mind flicked back to Elisa, to the baby she was carrying and the responsibilities that came with it. But then came the memory of endless board meetings, business rivals, potential leaks to the press. The idea of having a portion of his wealth secretly protected, accessible only to him and Celeste whenever he desired, was undeniably tempting. Still, a flicker of conscience made him hesitate. "It's a drastic step," he admitted. "I'd have to be sure about everything, sure about us." Celeste pressed her lips to his ear, sending a slow shiver down his spine. "You have me, Jack," she murmured. "And soon we can have the freedom you've always deserved." And that was all it took. In the low-lit warmth of the penthouse terrace, under the mesmerizing spell of Celeste's whispered promises, Jackson ignored the final, faint warning bell tolling in the back of his mind. He nodded, sealing the fate that would soon upend his life. "All right," he said, voice barely louder than the breeze. "I'll do it." He didn't see the satisfied gleam that flashed across Celeste's face. It was too brief, too carefully controlled. Instead, he kissed her, convinced that he was stepping into a new frontier of excitement and escape. But in truth, he was signing away far more than a few documents. He was signing away his fortune, his peace of mind, and perhaps the very life he had once known. By early July, Jackson was entangled in Celeste's scheme. Under her guidance, he began funneling a portion of his assets into newly established accounts. Officially, they were labeled as part of a trust, but the documentation Celeste presented to Jackson was far more complex. She employed lawyers, people he had never met, who assured Jackson that this was a robust financial structure used by international moguls. He signed piles of documents, never fully reading them, trusting Celeste's assurances that this was for their mutual benefit. In reality, the fine print named Celeste Duval as the primary beneficiary and manager of the assets. Over the course of several weeks, she convinced Jackson to transfer not just monetary assets, but portions of his real estate holdings, stocks, and even intangible properties such as patent rights from his tech ventures. Each time he raised a question, Celeste would soothe him with whispered promises and well-timed kisses. In his passion-laden haze, Jackson signed his fortune away, bit by bit. Elisa, meanwhile, found her suspicions mounting. She felt Jackson drift further each day, his phone constantly buzzing with messages, his demeanor more guarded. At her 7th-month prenatal checkup, she sat alone, absent-mindedly stroking her stomach while listening to the steady heartbeat of their unborn child. When the doctor asked where Jackson was, Elisa concocted a feeble excuse about urgent business. Yet the ache in her heart was real. This was supposed to be a joyous time for both of them, and yet she felt more alone than ever. Back at the Harrington estate, staff members traded hushed rumors. The usually diplomatic butler, Augustin, swore he had glimpsed a shadowy figure, a woman leaving Jackson's study late one night. The head housekeeper, Clarissa, noticed a strange perfume on Jackson's clothes that definitely did not belong to Elisa. Still, none dared confront him. Jackson was not an unkind man, but his authority and wealth meant that questioning him could jeopardize their livelihoods. Martina Polanski wrestled with her conscience. She had found bizarre discrepancies in the financial records that crossed her desk. When she delicately inquired about them, Jackson brushed her off, attributing them to a new joint venture. It didn't align with the truth she was piecing together. As the weeks went on, tension built like a thundercloud ready to burst. It was only a matter of time before the secrets spilled into the light. By mid-August, Celeste deemed her trap nearly complete. She had spent months forging the necessary documents, building her legal arsenal, and manipulating Jackson into signing away critical pieces of his empire. The final step required Jackson's signature on a contract that would effectively turn over all controlling rights of his estate and companies to what he believed was their private, Swiss-based trust. In reality, it was an irrevocable agreement, handing the lion's share of his fortune to Celeste, with no mention of Jackson or his potential heirs. Once everything was set, the day arrived. Celeste arranged a romantic getaway at a secluded villa in the Catskills' beautiful gardens, a private pool and seclusion from prying eyes. She had an official notary on standby, disguised as a part-time lawyer who had made the drive from Manhattan just to finalize the paperwork. The atmosphere was cloaked in warmth as Celeste and Jackson shared a candlelit dinner. Soft music played in the background, and the glow of lanterns set the garden abloom with golden light. After dessert, Celeste produced the final sheaf of documents. "I know it's a lot," she said, feigning anxiety, "but once we sign this, we'll be secure. We'll have our future laid out. Together." Jackson's hands shook slightly. For an instant, guilt flashed in his mind. He pictured Elisa at home, pregnant with his child, believing in him, trusting him. But Celeste reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. "Sign it," she whispered, guiding a pen into his grip. With one last longing glance at her, Jackson scrawled his signature across multiple pages. each stroke further binding him to her scheme. As soon as the ink dried, Celeste's crimson lips curved into a triumphant smile, one that contained more satisfaction than affection. If Jackson noticed the subtle shift, he didn't let it register. Later that night, as he fell asleep in Celeste's arms, she lay awake, calculating her next moves. For Jackson, there would be no going back. While Jackson indulged in his secret rendezvous, a storm brewed on the home front. Elisa, prompted by her growing desperation, finally confided in Martina. One afternoon, Martina knocked on the door of Elisa's private sitting room and found her gazing at a sonogram photo, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. "Miss S. Harrington, is everything all right?" Martina asked gently, closing the door behind her. Elisa looked up, raw vulnerability etched on her face. "I'm not sure what's happening to my marriage, Martina. Jackson's. He's disappearing before my eyes." Martina hesitated, glancing at the opulent furnishings, at the life Elisa and Jackson had built together. "I don't know if it's my place, ma'am, but there have been irregularities. Financial transfers, suspicious notes in his schedule." Elisa's breath caught. "Can you show me anything? Anything at all?" Steeling her nerves, Martina pulled out a folder containing copies of documents. She discreetly saved documents referencing unknown accounts in Celeste's name, wire transfers to Swiss banks, real estate contracts. As Elisa's eyes skimmed the pages, her heart pounded with equal parts dread and fury. She recognized signatures, Jackson's scribbled autograph, marking major shifts of funds. Some of the properties, including ones that were dear to the Harrington name, had new legal placeholders. "Who is Celeste Duval?" Elisa asked, her voice trembling. "A socialite, from what I can gather." "They've been meeting frequently," Martina admitted. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I wish I could do more." Elisa closed her eyes, tears burning behind her lids. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying Jackson's heir and possibly on the brink of losing everything. Yet beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred in her, resolve. She was Elisa Harrington, wife of Jackson Harrington, the man who once worshipped her. She would fight for her marriage, for her child, and for the legacy they had built. When Jackson finally returned from the Catskills, he found Elisa waiting for him in the great room, the folder of evidence neatly arranged on the glass coffee table. He entered, wearing the smug grin of a man returning from a luxurious tryst, but it vanished the moment he registered Elisa's resolute posture. "Elisa? What's going on?" he asked, setting his overnight bag down. She gestured to the documents. "I want you to explain these." Confusion and panic flickered across Jackson's face. He recognized his own signatures, the property documents, the accounts. Slowly, he sank into a chair, raking a hand through his hair. "Where did you? How did you?" Elisa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Are you having an affair with Celeste Duval?" Jackson exhaled, the weight of the deception pressing on him. He tried to speak, to formulate a lie that would minimize the damage, but he saw the sorrow in Elisa's gaze. He realized that no half-truth would suffice. So he confessed. Tears welled in his eyes as he recounted how it all began, the beguiling nature of Celeste, the excitement, the sense of escape. He left out the explicit details, but the betrayal was clear enough. Elisa listened, each word cutting into her soul like shards of glass. When he finished, she swallowed hard, placing a hand on her pregnant belly. "How could you do this to us?" she asked. "We're about to have a child." Jackson hung his head in shame. I don't have an excuse. It just happened, and I was too weak to stop it. But I promise, I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to lose our family." Elisa's expression hardened. "Then explain the financial side of this affair." This time, Jackson looked truly lost. "We set up some trusts. It was supposed to be for us, for me and Celeste, so I could manage my wealth more discreetly. I never intended to defraud my family, Elisa. It was just A bad decision. You signed away property, stocks, patents. Jackson. Elisa's voice finally cracked. Do you even know if you still own them anymore? The gravity of his actions crashed over him, a tidal wave of realization. Oh God, I just signed what she gave me. I trusted her. I never questioned it. I didn't think she'd betray me. Elisa's tears flowed freely now. You betrayed us first, Jackson. Did you think this wouldn't have consequences? For a moment, they stared at each other, the echoes of their history reverberating in the silence. Jackson knelt before his wife, hands trembling. I'll fix it, he vowed. I'll make this right for you, for our child. I'm so sorry, Elisa. As the clock chimed midnight, marking a new day, neither of them realized how swiftly the noose of Celeste's cunning was tightening around the Harrington legacy. Time was not on Jackson's side. The very next morning, he attempted to contact Celeste, desperate to clarify the terms of the documents he had signed. The phone rang endlessly, going to voicemail. Emails bounced back with cryptic error messages. Panicking, Jackson phoned the offices of the attorneys she had introduced him to, only to discover that they no longer had any record of Celeste as a client. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Word spread quickly among Jackson's closest associates that something was amiss. The usually unflappable millionaire was seen pacing the corridors of his estate, sweaty and frantic, barking orders into his phone. When he finally managed to reach a contact at a Swiss bank, they informed him that the account and the trust associated with it had been closed out 2 days prior. Every penny was gone withdrawn and transferred to an undisclosed location. In one fell swoop, Celeste Duval had taken an estimated 80% of Jackson Harrington's liquid wealth, along with controlling rights to key properties and intellectual properties. The intangible elements of Jackson's empire, licenses, patents, brand names, were also locked under legal constraints that pointed to Celeste or her shell companies. Facing sudden insolvency, Jackson scrambled to keep his creditors and partners in the dark. If word got out that he was effectively bankrupt, it would trigger panic in the markets, lawsuits from investors, and a catastrophic collapse of his remaining ventures. Elisa watched the chaos from a cautious distance. She was torn between anger and empathy. Jackson had dug this hole, but she still carried his child, still remembered the good man he once was. She resolved to stand by him, for now, if only to ensure that their future child wouldn't suffer for Jackson's sins. Deep down, she also believed that vengeance would do little good. What they needed was a miracle. Just as all seemed lost, an unexpected phone call arrived. It was from none other than Caroline Robertson, a name that carried significant weight in New York's legal circles. She was known for handling high-profile civil and criminal cases with unflappable skill. She had once represented a dear friend of the Harringtons in a complex intellectual property dispute. Caroline had heard disturbing whispers about the meltdown at Harrington Industries and suspected foul play. Mr. Harrington, I'm going to be blunt, Caroline said when Jackson answered in a trembling voice. I believe you've been the victim of an elaborate con. I've heard rumors of an accomplice, someone with a history of setting up these sorts of traps for wealthy men. I'm willing to help you and Miss S. Harrington if you let me. Jackson nearly wept with relief. Thank you, Caroline. I've never needed help like I do right now. Caroline's instructions were precise and demanding. Gather all the documents, all financial records, any communications with Celeste, and bring them to her office. She also advised Jackson to hire a private investigator to track Celeste's movements. Finally, she strongly recommended that Jackson come clean to any key investors and board members to minimize the damage and salvage what was left of his reputation. It was a tall order, but Jackson's desperation gave him no room for pride. Working around the clock with Caroline and her associates, Jackson began piecing together the puzzle of Celeste's criminal enterprise. She had used multiple aliases, set up front companies overseas, and had connections in the Caymans, Luxembourg, and Hong Kong. Perhaps most astonishing of all, an unexpected tip from an informant in Monte Carlo indicated that Celeste was rumored to be pregnant with Jackson's child, as well, though whether this was a lie to manipulate further funds remained uncertain. The scandal deepened with every layer they uncovered. Throughout this ordeal, Elisa's pregnancy advanced. The physical and emotional toll weighed heavily on her, but she refused to crumble. She cooperated fully with Caroline, provided moral support to Jackson, and made arrangements to secure what personal assets she could, in her name at least, to ensure their baby had something to inherit. For the first time in months, Jackson saw the unwavering strength in Elisa, the woman he had once adored. Shame and regret consumed him, but so did a new determination to atone for his betrayal. Leads pointed to the idea that Celeste might be hiding out in Monaco, a favorite playground for the ultra-wealthy seeking discreet banking. Acting on a tip from a private investigator, Jackson and Caroline decided to confront her. They flew to Nice, then took a helicopter to Monte Carlo, where the private investigator had traced a suspicious wire transfer from Celeste's account. With them came a small team of legal aides and local authorities, armed with enough evidence of fraud to detain Celeste if they found her. They trailed Celeste's rumored movements through the gilded casino floors, elegant yacht parties, and hidden enclaves of the super-rich. Days went by with no sign of her. Just when the trail seemed to grow cold, Jackson spotted a familiar silhouette on the deck of a mega yacht moored off the coast. He recognized that raven hair, that graceful posture, and that red-lipped smile visible even from a distance. His heart pounded like a war drum. Caroline quickly coordinated with local maritime authorities, securing permission to board the yacht under suspicion of financial crimes. Under the orange glow of a Mediterranean sunset, Jackson and Caroline climbed the yacht's polished steps, accompanied by uniformed officers. They found Celeste reclined on a lounge chair, a chilled cocktail in hand, wearing oversized sunglasses that failed to hide her astonishment at the sudden intrusion. "Jackson!" she exclaimed, feigning delight. What a surprise! He clenched his fists, adrenaline surging through him. "Celeste, it's over. We know everything." Celeste arched an eyebrow, slipping off her sunglasses. "Darling, you're making a scene." Caroline stepped forward, brandishing documents. "Celeste Duval, you are under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and grand larceny. We have evidence that you orchestrated a scheme to siphon off Mr. Harrington's assets." Celeste's mask of calm cracked momentarily, only to be replaced with defiance. "You have no proof. Jackson transferred everything willingly. Yes, but under false pretenses," Caroline countered. "We have enough to freeze your accounts, seize your assets, and prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law unless you return what you took." Celeste slowly stood, letting out a low, sarcastic laugh. "What I took? Oh, Jackson, you really are pathetic. You're upset because you found a woman with an appetite to match your greed? I owe you nothing." At that moment, local authorities stepped forward, prepared to detain her. Celeste locked eyes with Jackson for a searing instant. Then, with a theatrical sigh, she reached into a designer handbag, pulled out a phone, and began tapping. "Fine," she purred. "If it means so much to you, I'll initiate the reversal. But understand this, Jackson, there's no going back to what you had. You signed away your fortune to a phantom trust. You won't get every penny back." Jackson's breathing labored, tears threatening to fall. "I'll take what I can, Celeste. Because I have a wife and child counting on me." Celeste's eyes narrowed. A wife and a child. How quaint. And just like that, she tapped a final button on her phone, presumably issuing directives to her labyrinth of accounts. The authorities arrested her, and Caroline oversaw the immediate freezing of her assets. As Celeste was led away in cuffs, her face never lost that predatory confidence, like a lioness deprived of her prey, but not yet conquered. The next few weeks were a blur of legal negotiations and frantic financial rescues. True to her warning, Celeste had made it almost impossible to recoup the entirety of Jackson's fortune. Through months of litigation, and thanks to Celeste's reluctant cooperation, likely motivated by a desire to reduce prison time, Jackson recovered a portion of his wealth. It was enough to salvage Harrington Industries, repay critical investors, and avoid outright ruin, but not enough to keep the estate or the extravagant lifestyle fully intact. For Jackson, it was a harsh dose of humility. He sold the Greenwich mansion, downsized to a more modest estate, and poured his remaining resources into protecting his wife, child, and the core of his business. The tabloids had a field day when the story broke. "Millionaire conned by Mistress," read one headline. Another featured Celeste Duval, the siren who stole millions. Embarrassed, humiliated, and remorseful, Jackson released a public statement acknowledging his mistakes and vowing to prioritize his family from now on. Elisa stood at his side as he gave the statement, her pregnancy in its final weeks. She had struggled with the question of whether to leave Jackson, but in the end decided that for the sake of their unborn child, she would give him a chance to atone. Their marriage was not magically repaired, trust was shattered, hearts were wounded, but the possibility of a new start glimmered faintly on the horizon. In the final days of November, Elisa went into labor. Jackson rushed her to the hospital, every nerve on edge as she endured hours of labor pains. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, a piercing cry signaled the arrival of a healthy baby boy. Overwhelmed with joy and relief, Jackson cradled his son in his arms, tears streaming down his face. He made a silent vow to this tiny human, to guard him, to love him, to never again be so blind to the value of what truly mattered. In the aftermath of Celeste's betrayal and the partial reclamation of Jackson's assets, a deeper truth emerged. The trust documents, once thoroughly dissected by Caroline Robertson's legal team, revealed a clause that declared any direct descendant of Jackson Harrington as the rightful heir to his estate overriding Celeste, if said heir existed at the time of the trust's creation. This odd twist appeared to be an oversight by Celeste's legal team, or perhaps a concession she made to mollify Jackson during their planning stages. Regardless, it provided a lifeline. Jackson's newborn son was legally recognized as the principal heir, with Elisa acting as guardian until he came of age. Effectively, Celeste's meticulously crafted plan had been undone by one hidden line like an Achilles heel in a fortress otherwise unassailable. The courts recognized that the trust's legal structure, while designed to benefit Celeste, contained a controlling interest in the child's name. Although Celeste had stolen a large portion of the liquid assets, the intangible assets of Harrington Industries, along with core business holdings, now belonged rightfully to Jackson's son. With Elisa as the child's mother, she effectively became the gatekeeper of Harrington Industries, overshadowing Jackson's role. Initially, Jackson felt rattled by the change he was accustomed to being the head of his empire. But over time, he saw the poetic justice in it. His child, the innocent being he had nearly sacrificed for fleeting pleasure, now stood as the symbol of a future that could be guided by love rather than greed. Life settled into a quieter rhythm. The Harringtons relocated to a comfortable, though less ostentatious, home in upstate New York. Jackson poured his energy into regaining the trust of investors, business partners, and most importantly, Elisa. She, in turn, discovered a strength within herself that she never realized she possessed. No longer content to be a silent figure in the background, Elisa took an active role in overseeing the child's inheritance and the strategic direction of Harrington Industries. Caroline Robertson remained an integral ally, advising them through the lingering legal issues related to Celeste Duval. Over time, it became clear that while the story would remain a cautionary tale, the Harrington name would endure. The tabloids lost interest as fresh scandals emerged in the ever-churning world of the rich and famous. One crisp winter morning, Jackson found Elisa in the nursery, rocking their son, whom they had named James Harrington. Soft morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating mother and child in a tender glow. Jackson approached, his heart heavy with remorse, but also overflowing with gratitude. "How are you both?" he asked quietly. Elisa smiled down at James, who was dozing peacefully. "We're doing fine," she replied, her tone reflecting cautious optimism. He knelt beside the rocking chair. "I know it will take time, but I want you to know how sorry I am for everything." Elisa reached out a hand to gently cup his cheek. "I know, Jackson, and I believe you. Let's just focus on raising our son and building a life we can be proud of." In that moment, Jackson realized the magnitude of the second chance he had been given. Betrayal had nearly ruined them, but love, in all its resilient forms, was guiding them toward redemption. As we close the curtain on this tumultuous tale, it serves as a powerful reminder of how easily temptation and deceit can entangle even the wealthiest and seemingly most secure among us. Jackson Harrington's downfall came not from external forces, but from a lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness that spiraled into catastrophe. Yet, in the midst of shattered trust and stolen fortunes, a fragile seed of hope took root in the form of his unborn child. Ultimately, it was love, patience, and an unwavering sense of responsibility that allowed Jackson and Elisa to reclaim what truly mattered. Their story is both a cautionary tale about the perils of ambition and betrayal, and a testament to the healing power of honesty and devotion. If you found this real-life drama gripping, don't forget to hit that like button, share the story, and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic tales.